Ladies and gentlemen, your boy is back. It's December 3rd. What does that mean? What does it mean that it's December 3rd? It means it is your boy's birthday. It's a little birthday extravaganza we got here on episode 31 of the Be Great podcast. I haven't had an episode in a week. I hope everyone enjoyed their Thanksgiving last week. I hope everyone enjoyed Rivalry Week. I hope everyone enjoyed the chaos. I know I did. We're going to talk some ball. We're going to talk about the playoff rankings tonight. We're going to talk about a terrible coach in the state of Ohio that should be very worried about his place going forward. And we are going to talk about some other teams and their playoff chances. And I'm ready to just get right into it, dive right into the deep end. All right. Now, obviously, as you all know, I was not able to make an episode on Friday. Or sorry, you knew I wasn't going to make one on Friday. I wasn't able to get one out on Wednesday. I was just busy packing everything up to head out of town for Thanksgiving. So I wasn't able to get one out. So I got a lot on my mind. I got a lot to say, and we're going to get right into it. So let's talk about Rivalry Week. I have some games listed here in front of me. I have 4 that I'm going to talk about because they're the most important ones that happened. As a Georgia fan, I will go ahead and get the Georgia game out of the way first. And ironically, that one happened first on Friday, on Black Friday. So let's get into that. I stayed up. That game started at 7:30 Eastern and didn't get over till almost, 12:30 in the morning? Because it went into 8 overtimes. And I got to be honest with you. When Georgia Tech scored to make it 26-13, or no, 27-13, my apologies. When they scored to make it 27-13 with like 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, I had accepted the loss in my soul. I was ready. I had the anger already pent up, and I was ready to let it out. I had accepted that we were going to lose. And then we come back and we tie it because of my man, Dan Jackson, the walk-on. And so it goes into overtime. By the way, Kirby Smart, if I ever see you go for a meaningless 2-point conversion that doesn't change anything, if I ever see you do that again, I'm gonna have to drive to Athens myself to have a word. That was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen Kirby Smart decide to do. That was awful. I have no idea where that even came from. Unless he had some voodoo magic where he knew that later on that we would go to overtimes and have to have 2-point conversions, and he was just practicing. I mean, that call made no sense to me. No sense. Also, he said after the game, we have no more 2-point conversion plays left. Good, because they clearly all suck. Anywho, let's move on. And then you tie it, and it goes to overtime. And we go through overtime. No one wants to win, and Georgia finally pulls it out. And at the end of the day, am I happy you won? Of course, because winning and beating Georgia Tech were a lock for the playoff. Whether we beat Texas on Saturday or whether we lose to Texas on Saturday, we're in the playoff 100%, which is always a positive, right? My issue is that far too often am I seeing inconsistent play from this football team. The defense could not stop Haynes King to save their life. I mean, I thought this guy was prime Tim Tebow the way he was running on us. It was insanity. And he was hurt doing that, by the way. Well, they say he was hurt. He sure didn't look it, but, The defense was very suspect against the run in that game. I thought they were also suspect against the pass. I thought the defense was suspect all around. The offense actually wasn't terrible. The issue is 2 words. Arian Smith. Why do I say that? I say that because, look, Arian Smith has had a good season stats-wise, yards-wise. But if I see this man drop, if I was at a point in the Georgia Tech game where I was sitting there seething, telling myself if I ever see Arian Smith in a UGA jersey again, it will be my last day on this earth. I will pass away. I can't stand it. He makes plays. He's fast, but he drops some of the most important passes. He dropped 3 passes in that game, 2 of them in the end zone. I mean, I thought I was I wasn't thinking. I was just losing my mind. Okay, and I said this to somebody. I said, I bet you this man, when the McDonald's worker hands him his order in the drive-thru, I bet he drops that all over the street because he has no hands. He has no hands. I do like that Carson has been playing better, ever since the Ole Miss game. Although, actually, the Ole Miss game wasn't his fault. Since the Florida game, really. Because the Florida game, he did not play well. Since the Florida game, he's been playing very well. I mean, this is the Carson we remember from last year. That's what we've been seeing. He played well in the Ole Miss game. The problem was, A, the wide receivers can't catch, and B, the offensive line was leaving him out to dry the entire game. He was running for his life. He looked tremendous against Tennessee. I mean, he looked good against UMass because it's UMass. And then he looked good against Georgia Tech. So that's at least a positive. Julian Humphrey is entering the transfer portal. If you have listened to all 30 episodes before this, you know how I feel about that bum Julian Humphrey. The guy can't cover a deep ball. Ryan Williams exposed him. I don't know why we still started him after that game, because he is the sole reason Ryan Williams scored that touchdown for Alabama to beat us. He is the sole reason. He sucks in deep ball coverage. Sucks. And little fact here for you. Little tidbit, little fact. When I was in Athens not too long ago, I don't live in Athens, but when I was in Athens not too long ago, this was in the spring, I saw Julian Humphrey at a snow cone joint in Athens, and I turned to look at my brother-in-law because that was the day that we had the Georgia spring game, G-Day, and Julian Humphrey had gotten mossed by Colby Young in the spring game for a touchdown. And I turned, and when I saw him, I turned to my brother-in-law. I said, "That's Julian Humphrey. He got mossed in the spring game." I mean, was I not seeing the future? I mean, let's be honest here. Was I not seeing his future? I made sure not to say it too loudly. He could probably beat me up, but that's okay. That's okay. It's true, though. It's true. Look, at the end of the day, what matters is you won. That's what matters. Okay? And I find it hilarious that you had a lot of rival fan bases who were saying an awful lot about Georgia when they were struggling against Georgia Tech just to embarrass themselves and lose on Saturday. Let's get to those 2 teams right now. We'll start with Miami. Miami fans have had a lot to say all season, even though they play in a terrible conference, probably the worst Power 4 conference in college football. And you've played a weak schedule, and you've managed to lose 2 games. You lost to Georgia Tech, the team that Georgia beat, by the way, and you lost to Syracuse. I distinctly remember was it my ACC preview? I think it was my ACC preview before the season started. What did I tell everybody when I was going through Miami's schedule? I told you that Syracuse game is a scary one for Miami. watch out for the orange at the end of the season for Miami. And I don't think Mario Cristobal watched the episode, and I don't think he listened, even if he did, because he did not watch out. They went up 21-0 and acted like, oh, easy dub, we're going to the playoff, whoop-de-doo, and then train wreck, car crash, disaster struck. And now you're sitting here, and I believe, because you're sitting here not going to an ACC championship, and I believe Miami's out. I don't think Miami has a shot at making the playoff. I just don't. I think Alabama gets in before them. I think Ole Miss gets in before them. And I think South Carolina gets in before them. And I think if SMU loses to Clemson, I think SMU still gets in before them. So I think Miami's just out of it. And Mario Cristobal is going to Mario Cristobal. I mean, that's just the reality. That's just the reality. And did you hear Fran Brown after the game talking about how much he loves Kirby Smart and thanks Kirby Smart? I mean, come on now. I love my guy Fran Brown. I told you about him before the season. He's a stud. Anywho. By the way, just to rewind right here real quick. The Georgia Tech game. All I have seen on X, on Twitter, whatever you want to call it, after the game, all I've seen since is Georgia Tech fans and fans of rival teams, because they are haters, claiming that, oh, the refs screwed Georgia Tech. The refs helped Georgia win. They had money on Georgia. They should have called targeting on Dan Jackson. They should have called this. They should have called that. Let me explain something to you. I've said this numerous times. I will never claim here that Georgia lost because of refs. I will never claim that. As a Georgia fan, I will never say Georgia lost because the refs. Georgia lost because the refs screwed us. Okay? I will never claim that. Instead, I think it's important to look at all the other things that occur in order for you to think that you needed the refs in the first place to get a win. If you're Georgia Tech, if you're a Georgia Tech fan, I understand that refs miss calls, refs make calls that you don't like, and it's easy to blame them. Everyone does it at some point in their fandom life. But the reality is you were up 17-0 and you choked away the lead. You had 8 overtimes to win and you couldn't get it done. Don't talk about refs. Talk about your defense collapsing. Talk about your offense going mute in overtime. Talk about how all game of all regulation, you knew what worked offensively. It was running the ball, specifically with Haynes King. And then you get into overtime and you don't do it at all. You did it one time on a 2-point conversion and it didn't work. And you didn't go back to it. Why not blame your play calling in overtime? Why not blame your defense absolutely collapsing? Why not blame Haynes King fumbling? And you want to talk about the Dan Jackson targeting? First of all, there was another spot in the game where a Georgia Tech player led with his helmet, and they didn't call targeting on that. But, of course, you want targeting on that because it was a fumble and because you want to nitpick, right? Or how about the blatant on a 2-point conversion that would have won us the game, blatant pass interference on London Humphreys before the ball got there in overtime. But again, we want to nitpick and we don't want to look at that, right? Okay, that's cool. See, I don't want to hear nonsense about refs. If I talk to someone and the first thing that comes out of their mouth to me is, we lost because refs, I'm tuning you out. I'm done with the conversation. I'm not listening to you. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go back and forth with someone who's going to be dishonest and ignorant and think that the refs are the ones that are costing people games. That's not reality. It's not. There's a lot that goes into a game. A lot. And to say that the refs are the reason you lost completely removes any accountability for your football team. It just removes accountability. Okay? When Georgia lost to Ole Miss, when Georgia lost to Texas, or sorry, not Texas, Alabama, I wasn't blaming referees. I was pointing out things about Georgia that was wrong, that messed up, that wasn't good enough. And I've done that all season. Because you're going to have the complete wrong mindset if you continue to blame refs as the reason you lose. That's just what's going to happen. But we can move on. Oh, I can't wait to talk about this. I can't wait. I cannot wait. Ohio State, Michigan. I can't help but laugh for a few reasons. Number one, the fan base that I saw talking the most during the Georgia Tech game was ironically Ohio State fans. I saw them all over Twitter talking about Georgia. I'm sure they've deleted the tweets, but I saw them all over Twitter talking their talk just to lose and only scored 10 points against Michigan. This Michigan team that won 7 games with Davis Warren as their quarterback who can barely throw a forward pass. Another reason I find it funny is I have, not the brother-in-law I talked about earlier, a different brother-in-law that I have who's an Ohio State fan. And I will say, I'll give him credit that he's always critical of his team. Okay? He usually doesn't make excuses. Usually, not all the time. There's been a couple. But he can at least see the inefficiencies in what happened to Ohio State against Michigan. To put it as simple as I can, Ryan Day should not be the head coach of this football team after this season. I don't think you can fire him this week or anything like that because you're still in the playoff. So I think you should finish it out, at least see how far he gets into the playoffs. But, I mean, if Ohio State loses in the first round, how do you not fire him? With how expensive this roster is. And Urban Meyer, before the season started, was talking about how this is the best Ohio State team of all time. And you're 10-2, not in the Big Ten championship game, and you lost as a 23-point favorite to Michigan at home. Now let's talk about why it happened. I think primarily it happened because I don't know if I've ever seen such mind-boggling, puzzling, awful offensive play calling than what I saw out of Ohio State on Saturday. It made no sense. And I don't know if it's mainly because of Ryan Day. I don't know if it's mainly because of Chip Kelly. I would assume Chip Kelly because he's the one who calls the plays. But I also feel like Ryan Day had a say in it as well. Because you see, Ryan Day has a history of kind of getting in his own head and getting into his feelings about things. And one of those things he gets usually very defensive about is how the toughness of his football team. I mean, he took the time in a post-game press conference last year to go after Lou Holtz because Lou Holtz said his team wasn't tough, which, by the way, they weren't. They weren't. And they're still not. And it's been a problem with Ryan Day's Ohio State teams, is that specifically on the offensive and defensive line, his teams are not tough. They're soft. Charmin soft, especially the offensive line, who got annihilated by Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Annihilated. And you saw it in the game plan. You saw Ryan Day's insecurities in the offensive play calling. What did Ryan Day do that was just inexplicable? Him and Chip Kelly. It was they kept on trying to run up the middle with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson right up the middle into the Michigan defensive line. And every time it did not work, and yet they kept on doing it. Like they were bashing their head against a brick wall. The most inexplicable one was it was one of that led to one of the missed chip shot field goals. They were in the red zone and they handed off on 3rd and 10. Hand off to Quinshon Judkins right up the middle for no gain. It was inexplicable, and then he misses the field goal. It was inexplicable. I don't understand what was going through their heads. Now, that wasn't the only issue. The other issue is something that I pointed to multiple times this season, and that's your quarterback. Your quarterback is not elite. No matter how much there are Ohio State fans who want to lie and say that, oh, he's actually really good. He's actually elite. You should see his stats against Northwestern. He's not elite. He threw 2 awful interceptions. Horrendous. Some of the 2 worst interceptions I've seen this season were those 2 interceptions. I mean, especially the first one when they were backed up on their own end zone and he throws the ball literally, it was a dot, but it was a dot to the Michigan defender, to the outside. I mean, he's lucky it wasn't a pick 6. Although I think it did end in a touchdown, but I digress. Ryan Day cannot, if you do not win a national championship this season, Ryan Day needs to be fired. That is blatant malpractice. And I don't know who you go hire. I know Ohio State fans are clamoring for Urban Meyer. I don't think Urban would take the job. I'm going to be honest with you. I think Urban is happy with what he's doing. I don't really know if Urban wants to go and coach again. At least in college, although I don't ever see him get another NFL job, but it's whatever. I just don't think Urban's going to do that. And Ryan Day will get another job somewhere else very quickly, but he's clearly just not cut out to be Ohio State's head coach. He can recruit amazing, but it's easy to recruit at Ohio State, so I don't consider that impressive. But Ohio State's going to have to figure out what they're going to do after this season. Now, look, if he wins a natty, it's a moot point. He stays. But if he doesn't, they have a lot of thinking to do. 100% they do. Because that was one of the worst losses I've ever seen. I mean, it was... I was sitting there laughing. Not even because I wanted Ohio State to lose, just from... It was so weird and puzzling that I couldn't help but just laugh. Honestly. Another game I would like to talk about, South Carolina Clemson. And this is going to lead into my playoff discussion. South Carolina South Carolina might be the hottest team in the country, to be honest. I mean, they're playing really well. Lenore Sellers looks like a beast. And, they were able to pull out a close win against Clemson, which is still it's a good win. They were down for a majority of that game. I thought they were going to lose, to be honest with you. But they were able to pull out the win. And honestly, they've been the most surprising team this season for me. I'm honestly shocked at how good South Carolina has been. And, they're sitting here at 9-3? You could argue they should be 10-2, but they're 9-3, and they have a chance to make the playoff. And Clemson is, headed to face SMU in the ACC championship game. I'll have my championship week picks on Friday, and I will give those picks, and so you'll know how I'm seeing things. And I'll also give my reaction to the college football playoff rankings. But I will give you a little taste of what I think they could end up being at the end of this episode after I talk about the different scenarios that could happen. Let me first pull up the rankings as they currently stand from last week. But basically, it's overall just a good win for South Carolina, and I just wanted to mention them because they deserve it and because they play a big part in these playoff rankings going forward. So I think the rankings tonight will tell us a lot about where certain teams stand. Specifically, the main three teams we're talking about here are Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. So Oregon's going to stay at 1. I'm assuming they'll move Texas up to 2, Penn State up to 3, Notre Dame up to 4. Because Miami and Ohio State lost, Georgia will go up to 5. And then it's a matter of, okay, who's next? Is it Tennessee or is it Ohio State? I am of the belief that Tennessee deserves to be ranked ahead of Ohio State. So I would have Tennessee at 6, Ohio State at 7, SMU at 8, Indiana 9, I guess Boise State 10. And then it's really that 11, 12, 13 spot that's interesting, because that's where you're going to see Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. Now, right now, Alabama's at 13, Ole Miss 14, South Carolina 15. Does anyone jump anybody? That's the question. Or do they just keep that the same and just move it up? I have a bad feeling that they're going to sneak Alabama into this at the 11 seed. Even though I actually think that they might, out of the 3, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, I actually think Alabama might deserve it the least out of the other 2. South Carolina lost head-to-head to Ole Miss and Alabama. However, if they played today, I think South Carolina beats both of them. I definitely think they beat Alabama. They should have beat them the first time. But they didn't. But South Carolina has a way better resume. Their resume is a lot more impressive. They just beat the number 12 team in the country, Clemson. They have wins. They have good wins. Plain and simple, they have good wins. They've beaten Missouri, who's ranked. And yes, Alabama has the win against Georgia. Ole Miss has the win against Georgia. But Ole Miss also has a loss to Kentucky and a loss to Florida. Alabama has a loss to Vanderbilt and a blowout loss to Oklahoma. Because, see, to me, it's not just about the loss. It's how did the loss happen? What did the loss look like? Alabama got destroyed against Oklahoma. Destroyed. So, to me, Alabama does not deserve to be in that final spot. I think it should be South Carolina. I think they're the hottest team in the country. I don't think they're going to win a national championship, but I think that they are someone that no one's going to want to play. I do not think anyone wants to see South Carolina right now because Lenore Sellers is going to be very annoying to have to deal with. But that's where I stand. And another question has to be asked, okay, because there's really 4 options as far as who that final spot will be. It's, as I've already stated, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina. But then there's the other factor. If Clemson wins the ACC championship, where does SMU go? SMU is currently at 9. They'll be higher than that, I would imagine, in the rankings tonight. If they lose, they'll be 10-2. But they at least had an appearance in the ACC championship game. So would they fall below Bama to get Bama in? Or would they be the 11? That's what you kind of have to ask yourself. Do I think Bama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina are better than SMU? I do. But that's just something to look for. So I don't think Miami has a chance. Just to put that out there. I don't think Miami has a chance. But it'll be interesting to see what the rankings look like tonight. The National Signing Day, by the way, starts tomorrow, which is going to be a lot of fun. I think it goes from tomorrow through Friday, if I remember correctly. So we'll have to see how that goes. I'll probably talk about that on Friday as well, how that's going. Any flips, notable flips or whatever, how the recruiting rankings are looking. Transfer portal has been heating up this week. I already talked about Julian Humphrey, that bum entering the transfer portal. And there's been some other interesting ones. Miller Moss, the USC QB, has entered the transfer portal. Liberty QB Caden Salter has entered the transfer portal. I think those are the main interesting ones. Caden Salter will be one of the more highly sought after QBs. He'll definitely go to a Power 4 school. And honestly, I'm going to go ahead and make the prediction now. I think Caden Salter is going to wind up at Auburn. He played under Hugh Freeze. He looked really good under Hugh Freeze. And I think Hugh Freeze is going to jump at that opportunity to get an instant upgrade at the quarterback position, because that's what Caden Salter would be. He's dual threat. He's exactly what Hugh Freeze would want. So I already see that coming. Miller Moss, it'll be interesting to see where Miller Moss ends up for sure. I just don't know. Him getting benched and everything, although I still think he's a solid quarterback. That's the thing. I do think he's a solid quarterback, but we'll see where he ends up. I'm sure the transfer portal will continue to heat up. Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri, declared for the draft. He's going to be a no-doubter first-round draft pick. I would love for him to go to my Steelers, but I don't think the Steelers are going to pick high enough to pick him, obviously. But I'll also be covering anyone who decides to declare for the draft, because that will also be very interesting to see. I hope everyone has a tremendous week. I'll be having another episode 32, on Friday, where we talk about the championship games. I'll make my picks for the championship games, talk about recruiting, talk about the playoff rankings. There's a lot going on. Talk about transfer portal, all of it. We're going to talk about all of it. I hope everyone has a tremendous Tuesday, a tremendous December 3rd. Go out, celebrate my birthday if you want to. I give you permission. That's okay. And just enjoy your week and have a great day.